Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today at Words Fest. My name is Adam Furnell, and I'm a volunteer here at the festival. I look forward to this weekend every year, and I describe it to my friends and my family as a film festival, but for books. And I say that because, like a film festival, this weekend fills me with the energy to create and to think and to let my ideas escape into the world. To be given this each year for me is a tremendous gift, so thanks to everybody who makes Words Fest possible. This afternoon, we are going to hear from two people who are demonstrating a courageous willingness to challenge us to think differently, in particular about personal fitness. The description of Tracy and Samantha's book, Fit at Midlife, A Feminist Journey, states that the authors challenge society's default whats, whys, and hows of every aspect of getting fit. I love these kind of questions and generally believe that the more they are asked, the more life improves for all of us, not just those who we might typically think of as the beneficiaries of such questions. In the last week, I have spent some time exploring the blog Fit is a Feminist Issue that Tracy and Samantha created as they began their fitness journeys. As I browsed through the posts, I was struck by the matter-of-fact, casually consistent way that the contributors share their reflections on the notion of fitness. I say matter of fact because the blog raises questions that are sitting in front of all of us. Often they're not far from the surface, but I think that sometimes these can be the most difficult questions to ask. And I say casually consistent because I notice rigorous inquiry that I'm sure must have something to do with Tracy and Samantha's backgrounds as feminist philosophers, amidst a style of writing that welcomed me into a culture of asking critical questions about fitness. And it feels important to confront those questions. Before we hear from Tracy and Samantha, let me tell you a little bit about them. Tracy Isaacs is a vegan athlete, feminist philosopher, and academic in philosophy and women's studies and feminist research at Western University in London, Ontario. She's currently working on a new book that explores ethical and strategic issues in a vegan context. Samantha Brennan is a feminist, a philosopher, an ethicist, a parent, and a cyclist. She lives in Guelph, Ontario, where she's the Dean of the College of Arts at the University of Guelph. She's very active on social media. She's on Twitter at SamJaneB, follow along, and on Instagram as SamJaneBrennan. Together at the age of 48, they set out to become the fittest they've ever been in their lives by the age of 50. Along the way, they co-authored Fit at Midlife, A Feminist Fitness Journey, and co-founded the feminist fitness blog, Fit is a Feminist Issue. And finally, before I ask Tracy and Samantha to join us, I want to tip you off on a secret. At the end of this talk, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So prepare yourself for that moment at the end where we say, any questions? All right, without further ado, Tracy Isaacs and Samantha Brennan.
Thank you, Adam. And thanks, Josh, for inviting us to participate in this wonderful festival. We're both big believers in writing accessibly as scholars. And we'll talk more about what we love so much about blogging. But one of the main things is people actually read what we write, whereas our scholarship maybe not as much. So we're very happy to be here. We think kind of public humanities and making scholarship accessible is a really important part of our outreach as academics, and we're also both administrators, so it's just nice to get out and talk about ideas once in a while instead of budgets and policy and that type of thing. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we're kind of going to take turns telling you parts of our stories and of our story of the blog and the Feminist Fitness Challenge and how the book came to be. We're not actually planning to read from the book. We just wanted to chat about it a little bit and to answer any questions that people might have. And to talk a little bit towards the end about how we used the blog and social media to launch the book, because it is a literary festival, and I think those kinds of questions about how we frame our platform are becoming more important these days. So that's kind of what we're going to do, and Sam's going to start.
Right, so the book began really with a Facebook post. So I was 48 and thinking about turning 50, and at the time I wasn't thrilled with the idea. Like, I had kind of a gloomy idea of turning 50. I no longer have that gloomy idea. I'm now 54 and quite happy in my 50s. But in that way, as you're coming up to a significant decade, I had feelings about it. And I posted on Facebook that what I wanted to do was, if I thought of aging as kind of going downhill, I wanted to start from a really high mark. So my idea was that I wanted to be the fittest I'd ever been in my life by the time I turned 50. And that's a dramatic thing to say, except if you're an academic and you've been a bookworm and kind of in high school you were not the athletic person, you were the book person, it's easy to say because I had no athletic past. So there were no glory, there were no statues gathering dust, there's no trophies, there's no, an active past, but not a particularly athletic past. So I posted this on Facebook that I wanted to be the fittest I'd ever been by my life by the time I turned 50. Of course, my friends are all philosophers, so they all said, "What exactly do you mean?" And there was a very long debate about what that might mean, and the various things it might mean, and how you might measure it, et cetera, et cetera. And Tracy chimed in and said, "Actually, me too. This could be a thing that we do together."
And one of the reasons that it would be a thing we could do together is, so Samantha and I have known each other for 26 years, and our birthdays are a month apart, like exactly a month apart. So we were going to be turning 50 within 1 month of each other. And so I said, this would be a fun thing for us to do together, to commit to being the fittest we'd ever been in our lives by the time we turned 50. And why don't we blog about it? Because we had both been talking about blogging, and I think we had both kind of dipped our toes in blogs of various kinds in the past. And we thought it would be a fun project to do together. And we really didn't really think that anybody would read the blog, frankly. We thought our friends would read the blog, our family might read the blog, but that it would be a nice place for the two of us to not just document our challenge, although we did want to do some of that, and we do some of that on the blog, but also we had been having a conversation ever since we met in 1993 about what it meant to approach fitness from a feminist perspective. And we'd been talking about that for over 2 decades, and we wanted to use the blog as an opportunity to explore some of those ideas in a more accessible. I mean, neither of us had really done scholarship on this issue, but we thought the blog format would be exactly the right place for us to have these conversations and to try to introduce a different perspective on fitness that was more in keeping and more in line with our feminist values.
The blog really took off. It surprised us. For the first little while, we were celebrating, kind of, 100 readers, woo! And now we're approaching, what? 20,000 WordPress followers. So it was, we were a bit surprised. And we were, likewise, when we were, the media attention we received media attention around the blog. We've been recognized I've been recognized from the blog on airplanes now. Twice people have said, "Excuse me, do you mind are you Sam?" And I say, "Yes." And they say, "From Fittest, a Feminist Issue?" And I say, "Yes." And the blog readers who are sort of recognized as that never happens with academic work, I have to say. Like, that's never happened with any of my academic books. So it's kind of exciting, and we've over time had people join us. The blog now we're up to 11 regular bloggers. We're a blog community now. Tracy and I founded the blog, but now there are many other voices there. And the blog and the community that's grown up around the blog on Facebook and on WordPress has been really supportive, and we sort of feel like we've hit a nerve with finding a community of other people who want to join us. It's a conversation that we wanted to have, but it's a conversation that clearly other people wanted to have too. And so we're enjoying sort of curating that conversation, is I think kind of how we see our role there. Mm-hmm. The book, we talked on the blog about ideas for a book. Tracy and I talked among ourselves about ideas for a book. And The book does two things. It takes up the feminist analysis of fitness questions, but it also documents our challenge of being the fittest we were going to be in our lives by the time we turned 50. So the book is both our personal stories of getting fit and our feminist analysis of what it means to approach fitness from a feminist perspective.
Yeah, and the challenge was a real challenge. I mean, we really did commit to it. So we took it up around our 48th birthdays. In fact, I think we started on your 48th birthday. And we launched the blog pretty much on Sam's 48th birthday. And so we had 2 years to do this. And so we spent the first 6 months kind of flailing around trying to figure out what are we doing? And now we've made this public declaration that we're doing it, so we better figure something out. And I think the first 6 months especially had a lot of rough starts and false leads, and we knew, though, that above all, we didn't want to put weight loss at the center of our fitness goals. We didn't want it to be a part of the goal. And we didn't want to have aesthetic goals. So it wasn't like, I want to have a six-pack by the time I'm 50 or anything like that. We wanted to extricate all of the aesthetic and the weight loss and the sort of superficial kind of goals that are usually associated with fitness, and that we've found through hard-won experience could lead to kind of a very disappointing cycle of failure, really, because both of us had come to realize that diets don't really work.
Right, so we each thought about what we wanted to do for our challenge. For me, it was about, I identify as a cyclist. It's one of my feminist and cyclists. It's like we're kind of right up there. But at the time the challenge began, I really was just riding I was a cyclist, but not much of anything else. And so I wanted to branch out and do other things. So during the course of the challenge, I took up rowing. I did CrossFit. I tried a whole bunch of other different things. I'm now not just a cyclist. I still do other things, but my identity as a cyclist remained intact through the challenge. I rode my bike from Toronto to Montreal as part of the Friends for Life bike rally as a charity ride for the Toronto People with AIDS Society. That was the thing I did the challenge ended with completing that bike ride. Tracy took up triathlon.
I took up triathlon, and that was Samantha's fault, because on the Kincardine Women's Triathlon, which is an amazing event to start with if you're thinking of starting up with triathlon, takes place every July, but you have to register for it on January 1st. So registration opens at 10 a.m. on January 1st, and it usually fills up that day, sometimes within hours. So Samantha said, well, let's register for the Kincardine Women's Triathlon. This is, the 3 or 4 months into our challenge. And I had never done triathlon, and I hadn't been swimming. Not much of a cyclist, and I was just trying to like running, but not so much liking it yet. And those are the 3 elements of a triathlon. It's swim, bike, run. So I said, okay. Why not? Samantha's favorite line is, it'll give you something to blog about.
I use that line a lot.
Yeah.
It's a good line.
She's good at generating blog material. I'm not as good. And so Sam is always feeding me blog ideas. But back in the day, they were always more ideas about events. Like, do this, go learn how to ride on the track at the velodrome. It'll give you something to blog about. So it did. So I signed up for this triathlon, and I, started swimming, and I didn't cycle really. And like I said, I was trying to like running. And, even though I wasn't really, really well prepared for the event by the time July came, I loved it. I just loved the energy of multi-sport. And even though they actually canceled the swim, which was my strongest part of the triathlon by then, so we had to do a duathlon, a run, bike, run, and I hated running still at that time. I love running now, running is my thing now. But back then in 1998, no, 2012, 13, I did not like running. So we had to do the 3 kilometer runs, and I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna, run 3K twice? It seemed impossible, but I loved the energy of the transition zone where you have to come in from the run or the swim and, take off your wetsuit and put on your bike shoes and jump on the bike and go, and then come back and then change again and go. So I kind of fell in love with multi-sport, and so I set as my fittest by 50 goal. So Sam's was to ride from Toronto to Montreal with the bike rally, and mine was to do at least one Olympic distance triathlon by the time I turned 50, which is a 1,500 meter swim, a 40K bike ride, and a 10K run. So that's what I set as my training goal.
Do you want to talk now about the messages of the book?
Sure, yeah.
So that's so the book is 2 parts. The the main part is our challenge story, which you've heard a little bit about. The other part is the connections between feminism and fitness, which is what we want to talk about now, because people still, I was at dinner the other night with a group of philosophers who I had given an academic talk, and we were out for dinner. We're supposed to be talking about my academic talk. But it was graduate students and some junior faculty who all wanted to talk about feminism and fitness. Like they wanted to talk about the blog and the book and about how feminism and fitness are connected. So we thought we'd share some of those messages with you about the ways we see a connection between, the way we approach the world as feminists and the way we think about fitness. And the first part of our message is that there's a very real, people talk about a pay gap, but there's also a very real play gap. If you look at the Stats Canada numbers on hours per week that men and women devote to physical fitness, the number of minutes a day boys and girls move, if you get permission to stick accelerometers on children and let them run around for a day, as they do, you'll see that boys and girls start to move, girls move less than boys, starting really young. It's a little bit disturbing how much that gap starts, preschool, that gap starts. And that gap starts, we can speculate about why, about the kinds of restrictive clothing girls wear, about the worry we have about girls hurting themselves, the way we encourage boys in rough and tumble play and we don't encourage girls. But that gap starts there and gets wider. And gets wider again through high school. You can imagine the reasons. But persists through life and gets wider again at midlife. So the gap between men and women and boys and girls and how much physical activity we have is significant. It's significant because it matters for health reasons, but even more than health reasons, I think it matters because here's this thing that could contribute to your life going well, that's positive, that could be a good thing for you, that girls have less access to than boys, and that women have less access to than men's. Men, StatsCan has some they have some analysis of numbers of children you can have and time for physical activity. It's surprising, it doesn't affect men. Are we shocked? Not really. Like number of children you have in a family and men stop playing, Canadian men in opposite sex relationships stop playing weekly hockey. There is no number of children. And women at 2 kids start to drop out. I've had women on my soccer team who would lie about going to soccer, who would keep soccer clothes in the trunk and then say they were going to get groceries and off to visit their mother. I think this is like you're cheating in a relationship, only it's just coming to soccer. But it turned out to be a big deal. It felt like something selfish they would do for themselves versus something for the family.
One of the other themes that we take up a lot and that we really wanted to promote was the idea of inclusivity in sport and physical fitness activities. And particularly because our focus was on people in midlife, not just women, but anybody in midlife, we were concerned about the lack of diversity in representations of fitness and sport. So you don't often see in mainstream media representations of older athletes, for example, or of disabled athletes. And there are some incredibly elite, high-performing disabled athletes, but we only really see representations of them in a specialized context that is about them, not as a part of the, of what we would come to expect. And so we really wanted to promote the idea of diversity and inclusion. All shapes, all sizes, all genders, all abilities, all ages, all races, there should be no barriers of that kind, but there are. So we wanted to represent inclusivity in our book and on the blog. We talk about that quite a bit. And we talk a lot about issues around fitness and aging. We tend to, or a lot of people tend to think that some kinds of activities, it's too late, and maybe there could be some things that it's too late. I mean, I have no intention of climbing Everest, for example. That was always probably too late. It's going to be too late. But generally, there are lots of things that people can participate in any age, and there's lots of ways to contribute to your well-being at any age through activity that is appropriate to your level and your ability. So that's one thing. The other thing that we wanted that kind of made us sad and frustrated was just how prevalent the association of fitness with thinness is. It's almost immediate. And so almost anything that you'll read about fitness, within the first few pages, they will associate that with either a particular type of aesthetic, a thin aesthetic, or with the need to lose weight. Like you can't possibly be on a fitness plan if it doesn't include a restrictive diet that's designed to make you lose a few pounds. Like there can't be anything okay about the body you have right now. And this is a message that is so prevalent in the fitness literature that we really, it really made us sad. For example, we were, right when we were doing our challenge, a study came out, a huge study that they had done in the UK came out, that it turned out that there were women working out in sheds. They put their treadmills in the shed so that nobody would see them. And women running at night after dark so that nobody would see them. And we found all that really sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of literature on women not taking part in, like, I need to lose weight before I can go to the gym. Like people who think they're not good enough the way they are now to enjoy, they would enjoy this sport, but they can't undertake it because they don't look the way they need to look in order to do that thing. And that just made us incredibly sad. So we started to hear from a lot of people about that message and about how prevalent it was. And it was really, it was striking and sad and motivating to keep up the work of making an alternative place to talk about fitness, I think.
So we don't really talk about weight loss or dieting on the blog unless we're saying, hey, unless it's an anti-dieting. We do a lot of that on the blog, actually. We debunk food fads.
We also talk about midlife and why we think it matters, why the fit at midlife part matters. It's an age at which there are tremendous health benefits from physical activity. And that's one of the dangers of thinking it's about weight loss, because I think every single woman I know pretty much who's quit, you think you start some physical activity with the goal of weight loss. You don't lose weight, so you quit that physical activity and then forego all the health benefits of the physical activity. There's tremendous health benefits from physical activity, completely separate from weight loss. So you can be sort of neutral about the weight loss question and just think, here's this thing that's really good for you, especially at midlife. So at midlife, some of the benefits that people talk about are recently research on a decreased risk of dementia for those who are physically active, decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. For women, especially resistance training and weightlifting and bone density, these things really matter and make a difference. Even your risk of falling in the first place is, the more physical activity you do, the less likely you are to fall. Yet we end up in these narrow lives where we're scared of the thing and then don't do any physical activity. And it can be a very limiting, the numbers of women, so women on the how much women exercise question, so they've got Canada Fitness Guidelines, and the Canada Fitness Guidelines, among researchers, is controversy about whether they're the right number or whether that's just a number that people would find motivational. Because the true number is probably higher, but they think people would find it depressing. So there's that number is not a high number. It's a number that researchers think would be motivational because you could possibly see yourself doing it. So the number is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. That doesn't sound like a lot to me, but in the 18 to 39 group, 30% of Canadian women get that. We age a little bit to 40 to 59, and then it's 18%. That's a pretty low number, meeting a pretty low bar, and it's depressing. And so we're kind of interested in what barriers are there. How many of these barriers are about our attitude towards fitness and having fun and it being a social, fun thing that we can do versus it being this weight loss motivated, depressing duty that's just not fun at all, at which you might fail and then give up. So again, we're really interested in finding activity, talking about joyful activities, things that can be extreme athletic, performance-oriented stuff, or it can be dancing. It doesn't all have to be competitive sports. So
or hours and hours on treadmills or stationary bikes or elliptical machines. It doesn't need to be kind of joyless activities that you don't want to do.
I can no longer believe now that you read Joy and Peace on the treadmill.
War and Peace.
War and Peace.
I
right,
did.
War and Peace.
I did. On the stationary bike.
Right.
One summer I did. But that was before.
But that was the joyless version, right? That was the.
Well, I liked the book, but it was a distraction. The book was a distraction from the activity, and probably I wasn't pedaling at whatever rate I needed to gain the benefits.
So do you want to talk about sexism in sports? That's
the
last barrier. We're going to talk about the last barrier.
So the last barrier is just the simple. The sexism in sport and representations of sport. I mean, the objectification of women in sport, we talk about this quite a bit on the blog. There's always a new example. My favorite, I don't know why, but my go-to example is the difference between the uniforms of men versus women in beach volleyball. The women are in these skimpy, the women are in these skimpy little bikinis, and the men are in, sort of long, loose shorts and tank tops, and there just is no actual reason why that should be the case. So, other than the objectification of women in sport.
So when I teach sports ethics, it's the last place where there is still discrimination between men and women that it makes no sense. So it's still the place where men and women race different distances in a bunch of events for no good reason. So in high school track, it's gradually changing, but it used to be that the boys ran 10K, the girls ran 8. That's not about sort of some of the boys are running pretty slowly, some of the girls are running pretty fast. It's not really about tidying up the course in time. It's about sending a message. It's still true in track cycling. It's still true in speed skating and a whole bunch of sports.
Tennis.
Right, tennis. Do you really think they can't do that extra set? Right? Do you really look at the, Vanessa Williams and think, well, you couldn't possibly play another set. You don't think that, right? That's not a barrier. In the track cycling, women aren't allowed to race there isn't an event for women to race the kilometer. The kilo is the toughest event in track cycling, supposedly, but women can race the 3K, but not the kilometer.
And yet what's incredible too is when you look at ultra racing, women are some of the best ultra marathon runners in the world.
So it is one of the last places, I think, where there's a kind of sexism that we aren't used to seeing, and that it's sort of rule governed, it's outlined, it's just there in print. Like, it's not about attitudes or implicit bias. It's not implicit bias, it's just bias. It's just like right there.
Well, and the funding of men's professional sports versus women. So, I mean, we could talk about this forever. One of my favorite books, which has actually been around for a long time, is called The Stronger Women Get, the More Men Love Football. And she gives an analysis of how, football is kind of this male domain. And so as feminism has taken hold, in her analysis, men have really borne down on football. This is the male domain, where the testosterone rules.
So one of the things that's happened is we've been talking about the book, and we've been interviewed a bunch by reporters, and we've had we've been on television talking about the book. And one of the amazing things is, because it's almost always women reporters, and they almost always start out with kind of a set list of kind of objective questions. And then now we just know, Tracy and I just know there's going to be a point at the interview in which the person just says, I just need to tell you my story. And these women, we've had reporters crying about, as they tell us their story about how they no longer feel connected to their sport that they used to love, or they remembered this thing from being a girl that they don't do anymore. And we really feel like...
Or their eating disorders and chronic dieting. And
right,
oh my gosh, I mean, we've had this moment with almost every single journalist.
Right, because I think that profession, especially because there's such pressure on them to look a certain way, but they all have a story. And so we're really interested. So people often ask us as academics why we're interested in doing this more publicly accessible work, and I really feel like I've made more of a difference in the world through this more publicly accessible work than I have through, not to downgrade my scholarly work, but I really feel it's made a connection and made a difference in a way that my scholarly work has a harder time doing. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the blog to book idea for the last part of this, and we'll talk about I started blogging with, I think, the Feminist Philosophers blog, or the Peace Soup, which is philosophy, ethics, and academia. And I kind of took to blogging pretty much right away, because I loved if you're an academic, you write something, you send it away, it goes out to referees, and then years later, I'm not joking about the years later the thing is actually published. And it can be kind of it's an exasperating process. And sometimes you just want to say the thing and not have to go through all of that, not just because you think it may or may not get published, but it's just a long drawn out process. And so there's something about just hitting that red publish button on WordPress that's like, yes.
Yep. Tomorrow,
here we go.
1,000 people will read this.
And that was exhilarating for us. And fun. And the idea also that if you discover a mistake or there's a grammatical error or a typo, you can just fix it, also very appealing. As someone who hits publish too fast, I'm the hit publish too fast person and then go back and fix my mistakes person.
Sam always tells me about my typos. She said, I know you hate typos, so I'm just letting you know.
We have this thing about whether we should fix each other's typos without. So we both really liked blogging. And we also like all of I'm a bit of a social media person and really like all of the social media that we've associated with the blog. So we have a community on Facebook as well as a community on WordPress. And most of our experiences there have been pretty positive. And we enjoy having the community, again, the community of people we have blogging with us and the community of commentators. We have commentators who've been reading the blog since the beginning, who have a kind of an ongoing conversation with us as well.
Which is also one of the unexpected joys of this, is that we've, managed to attract people who have similar thoughts and who are willing to work through some of these feminist issues alongside us, and it's created a really great and lively conversation that is ongoing, every week. We blog every day. Our blog posts new content at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. Sam and I each contribute twice a week at least still. And there's always a lively conversation around it, which is quite exciting. Usually with academic work, by the time the thing is published, you're sick of talking about it. You don't want to talk, you've moved on. But with this, it's very fresh.
I will say that blogging, though, made me a little bit frustrated with book publishing. Both because the time it took to get the book published, like it took longer than we expected to get the book published. And I also like all the numbers. I'm a data person. Like on my bike, I like all the numbers. And on the blog, I like all the numbers. And I spend time kind of looking at trends. And it's hard with the book versus the blog. With the blog, I have easy access to who's reading it, where are they reading it, what time of day are they reading it. And with the book, I don't have that. So I keep wanting to know, like, book sales. And, that's harder, that's frustrating for me, that other people have access to information that I don't have access to. So I still prefer that side of the blogging world to the publishing world.
I'm less of a data hound, so.
I just share the data with Tracy.
Sam reports to me about that, not about anything else.
And I think
that's about it.
now I think we're ready for questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Should we sit down for questions or stand? Do you want
I
to
would stand.
You're going to stand? Sam's going to stand. Sitting
Sitting
would
would
look,
look nicer.
on the camera. Okay.
Questions? Yeah.
I would say that on the subject of sexism, I think you're right about the certain costumes that women
Okay.
are allocated as opposed to men. But I also feel like in our day, there's almost this reverse sexism that I feel like I have to be a football player, and I really don't like it, and I'm not drawn to it. And I almost feel like sometimes the feminists don't allow for a freedom of choice, and you're celebrated if you're going to play these rougher sports. And the other one with the other ball where you're piling the dog pile, and what's that one?
Rugby.
Yeah. And I really don't admire those women that play rugby. I don't fault them, and I think it's their choice, but I really think we are built quite differently from men, and I celebrate that. I celebrate that I'm built differently from a man, that I have maybe a hip placement that's different from his. And so sometimes I feel that pressure in the modern age from the feminists to be in sports in a way that is not engaging to me personally.
I think lots of people feel uncomfortable with gender pressure. So I think lots of men don't like the idea of rugby either.
Yes.
And I think I would separate that point from a point about gender and about male and female bodies and just think about gender expression and think there's lots of people who prefer gentler sports. And I think we ought to give boys access to, I have a son who was a dancer, and that was, a challenging thing when he was younger because everybody wanted him to, why isn't he playing hockey? That he's not a hockey kind of kid, just like you're not a rugby kind of woman.
There's definitely more permissions now, and I am actually finding the reverse, that your son who dances, especially if he was in Toronto, he'd be given all kinds of permissions. People wouldn't be saying so much to him anymore, why aren't you playing hockey? They'd be more, wow, you're a great dancer, and that's good if that's what he wants.
Yeah, I think it's hard in both directions. I think these days there's a lot of pressure on boys to do still a lot more pressure on boys to do masculine stuff, but also girls, still, I don't think you're happy with you say feminists are happy with girls in rugby, but lots of people aren't. And so there's still lots of pressure, I think.
And for us too, it's really about being able to make choices, and where do those choices come from? I mean, I like to question sometimes where my preferences come from, like how socialized are they actually by my gender expectations or the expectations that were placed on me as a girl, when I was growing up. And I know that, I grew up with two brothers and we were channeled into very different things. Not really because of raw ability, but just because that's the way it was. So it really is, in a way, about choice. And I don't think, I don't think the feminists are, forcing women to play football now, but saying, you know, there should be some choice.
The channeling that wasn't there. You say that we were channeled when we were younger. I didn't feel channeled. I'm very athletic and was always very involved in sports, and I did not feel personally channeled as a
Which
girl.
is fantastic. Great. That's great. That's good. That was not everybody's experience, however. There's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of gendered pressure.
About the opposite channeling.
Right.
Channeling each other. Anyway, I'll let
Okay.
people talk. Thanks.
Hi, there are many questions that I'd be interested in the fitness, but I thought I'd go to the publishing issue. What I've been wondering about this myself, what do you see as the relationship between the book and the blog? Because if there's a kind of stale dating when your book takes so long to publish, and meanwhile, presumably you guys have sped ahead in your fitness orientation, and so I can sometimes wonder these days if people don't publish a book as a symbolic act that symbolizes success or something like that. Can you give me an idea of what you
It'd be
expect
great if it symbolized
your book to do, so to speak, and its relation to the blog?
Well, one thing, so because of this more slow trajectory of a book, and in our case, I mean, I think the blog has a much wider readership than the book does. So we're getting a much more, our blog message is fresher, I guess. But the book has found readers who were not aware of the blog, and so in that sense, we're reaching an audience with some ideas that we still care about that aren't as time sensitive in a way. I mean, the feminist message about fitness is a more general message that is still worth being told. There are some things that now that the book is a book, we look at it and we wish it had more of. So we wish that we had a more diverse representation explicitly of questions about gender and transgender, for example. We did not have a direct engagement. Maybe it's not as intersectional as we would have made it if we were writing it today. We care about diversity and inclusion, but it was very hard to manage all the themes. And so I think, as with any book, once it reaches print, you think, oh, I wish I had said that, or I wish we had included that. Did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I do think it's an interesting world we're in these days where we have blogs and books, and they do reach different people. There are people who, as Tracy said, there's people who come to the blog through the book. I always imagine people going to the book from the blog, but there's a lot of traffic the other way. People who say, I came across your book in a bookstore, and here I am at the blog, and I'm happy you're still here. Like people who picked up the book and heard us talk about the blog, some of them were worried that the blog wouldn't be there anymore. And they're happy that they found that the blog is still there and still active, and that we're still writing about these things. So they've enjoyed. Someone who said, "I just finished catching up with you,"
Right.
because they read all,
catching up.
because they caught up on all the blog content from after the book.
So if I can just pursue that one more minute. So I'm guessing that the book forces discipline or organization, sort of an assessment of the directions you're going, which is one of the reasons you weren't happy in the end, because you feel you might have missed some things out. So I'm assuming it's kind of a structuring process that whether you want to or not, it'll end up affecting your blog.
Yeah, one of the things I loved about the book process was the editing. I've never had, as an academic, I've never had anyone, I've had people pay a lot of attention to my ideas and arguments, but I've never had anyone pay attention to my writing. And I really enjoyed having, at first I wasn't quite sure. But after seeing how much better it was after I had all the editing, I now would consider hiring an editor for academic work that I do. Because that was really positive.
I wonder if you can speak to how, as writers of fiction, we can work towards changing this play gap that you're talking about.
So, like, fiction aimed at children would be a great place to start, right? Where we have really active girl characters who take up physical challenges and who take risk, right? It's the risk part, I think, that's really that girls are discouraged from doing. You know, even when I still think of myself as not that old, but growing up, I mean, none of the physically, any sports that involved contact were not there as an option for me. And I'm somebody who would have enjoyed, I would have enjoyed rugby, but rugby was not an option. So there are, I think there's different stories we can tell. And stories where girls do physically daring things, and not just emotionally daring, and not just, relationship daring, but actually physically daring things, and are hurt and get better and are okay and are resilient. I think that would be a good thing.
Is there anything as a parent of boys that we can do to encourage that as well? Because I think there's a huge importance in not just as girls pursuing those challenges, but as a mother of boys, I've seen the reaction from the boys to that. And how can we help them grow and accept that, and not just accept it, but see it as normal?
Yeah, I think the challenge with boys is almost always about having them see the range of things that they can be, and having them see the range of things that girls can be. So having them think about all the different ways they can be in the world, and they don't have to be the macho tough guy all the time. That's the biggest thing, I think.
I was interested in the play gap because it leads to the issue of pleasure. And in my own work, I work on what keeps readers reading things enough to do those thousands of hours of reading you need to become good at it. And it never works to say, you should read a lot when you're in grade 2, because then you'll get into law school. And similarly, I don't think you can say, you better start exercising when you're 20 or else you'll have osteoporosis. But some of what you were saying about your own experience, you didn't like running, but then you did. What do you think can be done to diminish this play gap by making it more fun? It's a question about pleasure, I think.
But I think you're exactly right. By making it more fun, that's one of the things we talk about. Especially with kids, because as kids, you don't really channel kids into physical activity. Well, maybe people do, simply for the physical activity. It's as part of their play. And so the more, my view is always, the more we have a more gender-neutral kind of encouragement process, where we're encouraging kids to be active, to find things that they enjoy participating in, and not not doing the overprotective thing with girls that Sam talks about, if we don't want them to get hurt. And so people are much more careful with the kinds of rough and tumble play that boys do about girls. They're sort of cautioned against. And so to me, it's more about having a range of choices available to all the children and encourage them. It's not that complicated, I think. But we don't do it, or it often doesn't happen. I shouldn't say we don't do it. There's a lot of gendering that goes on at a really early age. Also, there tends to be, and this is a much larger social issue, when girls reach adolescence, their preoccupation becomes with their weight, with their bodies, how they're changing. Am I attractive? Are men finding me, especially the straight girls, if they understand their sexuality at that age? Do the boys like me? And so their whole attention goes to something else. And that's where the play gap really widens and starts to widen. So, I know that sounds in a way like a very simplistic analysis, but it's very dramatic. The stats are very dramatic about when it drops off and widens.
I think in terms of fun, we have to sort of go back to school and think about their approach to physical fitness, because so much of it is not fun. And when we blog about gym class, and I said it was just at dinner with a bunch of academics who were they were young women, but they were all at colleges in the United States that had mandatory phys ed. You had to do a bunch of their colleges, you had to do 2 phys ed credits to get, say, your philosophy degree or your English degree. and they were all talking about the classes they would try to take to get away from some of the harder phys ed classes. So one of them had done bowling as her phys ed credit, and the other one had done Zumba as her phys ed. They were looking for, so they were there, but the older women were saying that when they had done those classes, those things weren't even an option. And I think back to my high school where I showed up, in high school, I showed up for run club. I thought run club sounded like it might be okay. So I showed up one day for run club. And what run club consisted of was the gym teacher took off running and all the students ran after her. And I was left kind of in the dust, unable to, I couldn't run very far. So I ran a little bit, but I ran alone. I cried. I went back to the gym. And there was no idea that you needed to learn to run. There was no idea that you could run for a little bit and then run more. I just thought, well, some people can run and some people can't. And clearly I can't. And I never went back to run club. But run club was not fun. And there's ways now that we make it more fun. So I think on some things we do a better job now than we did then.
We have time for one last question.
Well, it's more of a comment, so maybe, I don't know, I'll just say it real quick. So I did recently reconnect with a sport from my youth, and I do have to admit it rejuvenated me. I'm connected with it as a volunteer coach, and just sort of to mention that it is the most female-dominated sport there is out there, synchronized swimming.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes there is that other side where, girls aren't allowed in one sport, but in this sport, a post-puberty male really has a very tough time. Their body is just not right. So I do kind of concur with the lady with the first question or comment earlier, that there are at points in life where, because of our bodies, there are certain things we can and can't do. But that doesn't mean that there's the occasional female who could still play, football with the big guys, and the occasional male who might be okay in synchronized swimming, but they're the exception more than the norm.
Right. Well, I agree with you. And what I would comment on that is also about the recognition of the athleticism in a lot of feminized sports. So synchronized swimming, for example, requires a huge level of fitness and athleticism and strength and grace and all sorts of things, and is not kind of held to that same degree of awe sometimes as maybe this kind of athleticism that we might associate with something else. And so in a way, it's also, of course, one of our most popular blog posts actually is called The Shape of an Athlete. And it has photos from Howard Shantz, who took photos of Olympians all standing in a line, and they're, men, women, all diverse body types. And the diversity of body types is incredible. And so it's obvious. You're not, in a way, of course we recognize that everybody has different bodies and not all bodies are going to be playing the same sports. But is that something that we recognize, or is that something we create hierarchies about? And are those hierarchies gendered? I think that often, yes, the hierarchies are gendered, and that is an issue of social equality. So, that is kind of one of the things that gets us really excited, and we talk about a lot on the blog. So it's not to try to channel people into sports that aren't appropriate for what their capacities are, but rather to recognize, that there are some pretty serious gender issues going on in this area of discussion.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for the great questions and the discussion, and thanks to Samantha and Tracy for being here today. It was a pleasure to have you.